The Yaksha, Part 1. I don't know if your family has any grudges with that feng shui master, but everything built here is disadvantageous to the homeowner, at least causing disaster and illness, at worst causing death to future generations. The house here has violated the 5 feng shui killings: form killing, light killing, air killing, sound killing, and wind killing. It was midnight. I was walking slowly on the familiar dirt road. Today was the full moon day, so the moonlight was still hidden behind the trees. The weather was chilly. Every now and then a light wind blew through the tamarind leaves along the deserted road, bringing with it the first cold of the season. I put my hands in my woolen coat to keep warm, looked up at the somewhat gloomy scenery around me, sighed, and then trudged towards Aunt Hai Gu's chow shop. Far away, under the dim light of a kerosene lamp hanging near the wick of a gourd tree extending out to the street, I saw a few silhouettes of people sitting in front of the shop. Aunt Hai's chow cart was placed right next to the old tombs built with honeycomb stone but always filled with incense smoke, making the scene somewhat quiet and gloomy. Perhaps that's why people called Aunt Hai Gu's chow shop the Hell Chow Shop. The population in this area is still sparse. Each house is several gardens away from each other. The dirt roads are small and narrow, and there is no electricity yet. Yet Aunt Hai's chow shop has existed for nearly 20 years now. Every midnight, she silently pushes her chow cart out to sell until morning. I heard that sometimes she cannot sell a single bowl of chow, but she still perseveres and does not give up this profession that depends on the unpredictable wind and rain. I approached the bamboo table, and it turned out that the figure just now was Uncle Tu Bien, who was over 50 this year, and whose house was a few acres away from mine. The person sitting next to him was Quach, who was a few years older than me. I politely said hello. Uncle Tu looked up and saw me, smiled and said, "How? When did you come back without telling me anything? Sit down here. The other day I went to your house to meet your dad for tea and chat, but I didn't see you." I sat down and slowly, "Yes, I just got home this morning. I missed Aunt Hai's porridge so much that I took the opportunity to eat it while visiting her." I looked up at Aunt Hai and nodded slightly. Aunt Hai brought me a bowl of hot porridge. "Are you still healthy?" "Yes, I'm fine. Aunt Hai smiled softly and then quietly turned away. Aunt Hai was always like that, very quiet, but a very kind person. Her face always had a sad expression. Uncle Tu twisted a cigarette, took a long drag, then gently blew a thin white smoke into the air, blending with the dim yellow light of the kerosene lamp, penetrating my shadow on the rocky road. The scene seemed to slow down for a few seconds. Mr. Quach took a sip of tea and patted my shoulder. "How? I heard that you can see ghosts. Is that true?" "I don't believe it, so I want to hear it from your own mouth." Before I could say anything, I heard a loud crash. It turned out that Aunt Hai accidentally dropped the chow bowl. Her expression seemed strange at that moment. Mr. Quach urged again, "Is that true, How?" I was confused, quickly shrugged and smiled. "People say it, but don't believe it." I quickly changed the subject. "Uncle Tu, why are there always incense smoke billowing from those graves? Is it Aunt Hai who lights them, Uncle?" "Yeah, that's right. Every time she goes out to sell, she lights incense for those graves. When the incense burns out, she lights another one until she returns. You see, she leaves dozens of bundles of incense on the shelf." After saying that, Uncle Tu pointed to the car. "Is that grave of Aunt Hai's relative, Uncle?" "I don't know either, but it's probably just a matter of courtesy when borrowing a place to do business. Only then will people who are out of sight bless you with a smooth business." I nodded silently, intending to pick up the bowl of chow and take a sip to warm my stomach, when Uncle Tu said in a low voice, "Speaking of graves, let me take this opportunity to tell you a scary story about ghosts that I will never forget." Just then, A cool breeze blew past us. The rustling leaves of the trees swayed, adding to the mystery of Uncle Two's story. He raised his sunburned, sinewy arm, took another drag of his cigarette, and slowly said, "I still remember clearly that year was the beginning of the rainy season, when I was still very strong. Every time it rained and at night, I and the young men in the neighborhood would gather to light torches to go frog hunting." That night, after Aunt Two put the children to sleep, I picked up the bamboo pole, lit the torch and slipped through the leaf wall on the side of the house, about to leave when Aunt Two saw something strange and stopped me and asked, "Where are you going that way?" She asked me where else to go but to catch frogs. "You usually go with the young people through the fields of Group 1. This is the direction to the riverbank. What are you doing there? There are too many of them on the other side. Should I change direction to the land of Group 5 to see if there is a big harvest? But what? Say it quickly. It's very late." I heard that. The river behind the house at night often has those dirty things. I've heard people say that a lot. Aunt Two stammered. After listening, her uncle cut her off. "You spend all day listening to nonsense stories. I'm going now." He walked quietly in the night, wading straight to the back of the house. At that time, the forest was not like it is now. At that time, he did not think about ghosts or anything. All around him was darkness. He could only hear the frogs croaking in the distance and the crackling of the torch. Occasionally, the embers fell onto the water, creating a bitter, faint sound. He waded through the forest, reached the river, and struggled to push out the three-leaf boat hidden in the small bricks. He put the torch on the boat's net and swam slowly. Along both banks of the river, he could only see water coconuts mixed with tall, curved trees and a few vines. The reason why Aunt Two said that was because in the past, on this river section, a very sad thing happened. One dark night, a group of people broke into a family's house, beheaded them and threw their bodies into the river, all 5 of them. I don't know why, but people say that they were robbed. At that time, this area was very chaotic. Their bodies were buried right next to their house, along the riverbank. Now, there are no traces of their graves. The people here whispered to each other that at night, they often saw the black shadows of 5 headless people standing by the riverbank, waving their hands. Some people also said that sometimes they saw shadows flying back and forth across the river, but I never believed in such nonsense. I was famous for being brave. At that time, I thought so I leisurely splashed the water. The crescent moon called out to the strangely quiet water surface. The sound of frogs also quieted down, giving way to the sound of an owl somewhere, sometimes far away, sometimes near, as if coming from nothingness. He swam for a while and suddenly the torch went out. He thought to himself, "What a strange thing. There's no wind at all, why did the torch go out?" He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice the disaster that was about to befall him. When he raised his head to look around, the scene seemed clearer than when the torch was still on. Quiet are 2 words to describe the scene at that time. He continued to paddle, the water trickled along the side of the boat, the dying torchlight shone brightly in the dark night, bobbing on the waves like a ghost walking on the river. The flickering ashes flew up into the thick, gloomy sky, boom boom, boom boom. He stopped when he heard that strange sound in the middle of the night. It sounded like someone was swimming in the river. His hand gripped the oar handle tightly, his eyes strained to look in the direction of the sound. In the distance near the coconut palms, the water seemed to be very turbulent. In that dark space he could see nothing but an endless stretch of black along both banks of the river. He thought to himself, could it be chicken and duck thieves? Thinking so, he grabbed the knife and slowly rowed closer. When he was only a few meters away, the clouds that covered the moonlight drifted away. the weak light shone down on the river surface to reveal before him a terrifying sight. A pale, wet face grinning happily. Its body was bruised and shriveled, and on its neck there was a line that kept opening and closing, looking very gruesome. He opened his mouth wide, dropped the knife in his hand, almost lost his composure and fell into the river. Its sly gaze looked at him as if an electric current was running from his spine to his neck. Before he could regain his composure, it suddenly rushed to the shore, ran to the base of the grove with lush branches extending into the middle of the river. It climbed up to that branch in a flash. Then it sat perched like a monkey. After a while it hung itself and crawled back and forth on the branch, laughing loudly as if resentfully, echoing in all directions. The owl nearby also flapped its wings and flew away. At this point, he no longer dared to look up. It took him a long time to regain his composure. His hand holding the oar was shaking like a person with malaria. He tried to climb up quickly, but for some reason the boat only moved little by little, little by little. What was even more terrifying was that when the bow of the boat had just reached that branch, suddenly a human head fell onto the bow of the boat. With the same sharp, ghostly eyes and the same terrifying laughter, the head bounced up and fell into the river. He could not restrain himself any longer, so he swung his oars to turn the boat around, using all his strength to swim as fast as he could towards home. He did not dare to look back, nor did he dare to make a sound, but his throat kept hissing from time to time because of fear. But it was not over yet. When he turned the boat to run away, he heard something falling from above behind him. With a loud splash, he had a premonition that something bad was about to happen. Indeed, behind him there was the sound of rushing water coming towards him. He hiccuped several times and then dove headfirst into the boat. Suddenly, from the bottom of the boat, there was a loud and continuous splashing sound. Then a bony arm reached out from under the water and grabbed the boat's web near his feet. In panic, he immediately grabbed the knife under the boat's trough and chopped repeatedly at those fingers. Then he jumped into the river and swam straight to the shore. He pulled his legs together and ran as fast as he could. Several bushes broke underfoot. After running straight home, he fell to the ground gasping for breath like a dying man. Aunt Tu was startled and cried out in fear that he had a stroke. The next morning, he gradually regained consciousness and told Aunt Tu everything. Her face was bloodless. She hurriedly invited a traditional medicine doctor to treat him, and then invited a shaman to perform a ritual. He himself lay paralyzed in bed for a whole week before he could sit up. From then on, he never dared to cross that river at night. When he went to look for frogs, he went with many people. It was only later that he heard Aunt Tu tell him that Mr. Nam was indeed very talented. Hearing Uncle Tu Bien tell this, I quickly interrupted. Which teacher is this, Uncle? Teacher Nam lives in the Lotus Pond area. If you ask your father, he probably knows about him. He is very famous, but his way of doing things is a bit strange. I mumbled to get it over with. Then Uncle Tu Bien continued the story. Your fourth aunt had to go all the way to the Lotus Pond to invite him back. That day, he asked your fourth aunt to buy a pig's head and some other miscellaneous gifts. Then, when night fell, he rode out to the river alone. He told her not to let anyone follow him or go near that place. After a few hours, he returned and only said to your fourth aunt, everything's fine. It's okay. Then he calmly took his bag of tools and left in the dark. The next morning, I was able to sit up. After listening to the story, Mr. Quach slapped his thigh loudly. Wow, wow, this teacher Nam seems to be quite skilled. Uncle Tuesday, looking at Mr. Quach's admiring face, I almost burst out laughing but tried to hold it back. if Mr. Nam wasn't so skilled, would be on the altar with my ancestors by now, not sitting here telling you stories of the past. Mr. Quach scratched his head, smiled, then lightly tapped his hand on the bamboo table and happily said, "Uncle Tu, while we're in a good mood and Hao is back, let's have a few glasses of wine to warm up and tell ghost stories. If you like it, I'll ask Aunt Hai to bring out wine and snacks. Today I'll treat you. And next I'd like to share a strange story I once experienced. What do you think?" As if he was just waiting for that, Uncle Tu laughed heartily and turned to me. "What do you mean, how?" I hesitantly replied, "Yes. I can't drink very well. Why don't you and your brother just drink and I can sit and relax? You. Having a few drinks won't kill any French or Westerner. Besides, it's rare that Quach will pay for it. If you're afraid of getting drunk and your father scolding you, just say that Uncle Tu incited you." Mr. Quach was embarrassed and quickly interrupted to explain, "Uncle Tu acts like I'm so stingy. As for me, I still have important things to do tomorrow, but since Uncle Tu has already said so, it would be bad if I refused." After thinking for a while, I decided that having a few drinks with him and my brother wouldn't be too bad, so I agreed. Brother Quach hurriedly urged Aunt Hai to prepare the food and then brought it out himself. "Wine and meat are ready, time to fight, Uncle Tuesday." Mr. Quach How excitedly started our conversation about the underworld. He poured a full glass of wine and gave it to Uncle Tu. "You open the knife first, Uncle Tuesday." Uncle Tu raised the glass of wine to his mouth to drink, but I quickly stopped him. "Wait, Uncle Tu, can I borrow a glass of wine? Do you want to drink first to warm your stomach?" "Here, do it first." I said nothing and reached out to take the glass of wine, then stood up and went to Aunt Hai's stall to ask for some incense sticks. Everyone was still bewildered. I lit the incense sticks until the smoke was billowing into the air. I went to the small shrine of the earth god located under the myrtle tree, lit 3 sticks for the shrine and then returned to my seat. I continued to stick 3 incense sticks into the bamboo chair next to me, then raised my glass of wine and mumbled a prayer. "Full moon day, door open. Soul comes back. Spirit passes. If you stay here, then please come in and have a few drinks." We sat and talked. "Nonsense, just listen, don't touch. If you like it, don't tease me. If you are angry, don't be reckless. Remember, West has Earth God, East has White Tiger. Please accept this glass. Soul comes back, spirit passes." After praying, I poured the wine around the chair in an arc. Then I looked up and saw everyone staring at me, except for Quach's face, which was as pale as a banana leaf. He stammered, "What are you doing, Hao? Could it be that you can really see ghosts? Could it be that you saw those things lurking around here? Don't scare me." Uncle Tu also continued, "What were you praying for just now, Hao?" I was confused and quickly waved my hand to explain, "Yes. Yes, it's not like what everyone thinks, because I heard the ancients teach that when eating and drinking, you must look before and after, whether you are living or dead. As for that prayer, I just recited it casually, everyone don't need to pay attention to it." Mr. Quach breathed a sigh of relief. "You bastard, you almost scared me to death. I thought you were a shaman." I chuckled and poured another glass of wine for Uncle Tu. He drank it all in one gulp and then said, "Ah, delicious." Mr. Quach swallowed his saliva and looked greedy, without waiting for me to move. He grabbed the wine bottle and poured a full glass, also drank it all in one gulp. The strong wine mixed with the gentle aroma of the bowl of chow long made me almost drunk before I could drink. I secretly laughed thinking how many times in life do we get to sit together and talk, so I just drank. I picked up the glass and drained it, then grimaced as if I had just bitten into a chili pepper. Uncle Tu and Mr. Quach burst out laughing and teased me, but I didn't pay attention because I was feeling the warmth gradually from my throat to my stomach. The taste of the wine was slowly no longer bitter. I could only feel the slight sweetness of the rice and the strong warmth of the yeast. The tip of my tongue was a little numb. It had been a long time since I had drunk alcohol, since the day I received my graduation certificate and said goodbye to my close friends in class. I looked up, raised my head to look at Uncle Tu and Mr. Quach, and then let out a long, ah, like a wine connoisseur. Both of them froze for a few seconds, then burst out laughing in unison. Uncle Tu laughed and said, "Why are you drunk after just one glass, my nephew?" I scratched my head and said, "I told you I don't know how to drink. Okay, let's get back to the late night storytelling." Having said that, he turned to Mr. Quach. "Quach, I heard you say you wanted to contribute a ghost story. Now tell it to everyone." Mr. Quach said yes and then began to speak in a low voice. "The story is like this." Oh wait, let me take another sip of wine to calm down. He shivered and took another sip of wine. His hand did not put down the glass. He stopped laughing and his eyes began to become sad and distant. I think this must have happened to him too. He sighed and began to reminisce. Maybe people don't believe it, but this really happened. And I was the one who started all the misfortunes that I'm about to tell you about. I always feel very regretful and hate that thing, until now. Uncle Tu is probably familiar with my wife Men, right? After Men and I got married for a year, we had a son. I was very happy. I also told Men that when Men grows up, I will teach him this and that, even though I'm completely ignorant. Mr. Quach smiled faintly and continued, "When the stubborn boy was 3 years old, I thought everything would go smoothly as I thought, but then the fateful day came. That day, the village chief Bin's house was harvesting fish, so he stopped by my house and asked me to come over and help him, and at the same time, he cleaned up the pond for him to release a new batch of fish. I was hesitant and decided not to go because I hated this guy so much. You know, he was known to be stingy and unpleasant, but because he promised to pay me well, I agreed. So he carried me on his bike across the muddy road of the swamp, then had to carry the bike through several fields to get to his house. This was also the first time I went to Ba Bin's house. My first impression when I saw the house from afar was that it was quite spacious and neat, but I still felt something strange and stuffy in this house. He led me straight to the back of the house. His pregnant second wife followed him. "Go behind the house," he pointed to the fish pond and said, "Here, help me. I have already placed the cooler pump there. Please pump the water, catch all the fish and clean the pond for me. I have to go to the market for a bit. I will be back soon." I asked in surprise, "Why am I doing it alone? Didn't you call for someone else to help?" "The pond is so big. How can I do it alone?" "Hey," I called, but everyone was busy. "Can you help me?" Without waiting for me to answer, he quickly turned away. I could only grit my teeth and accept the loss. I knew he was not a good person, but paying a high salary turned out to want me to do everything. This 2-day salary was not enough. I turned to look at the pond and sighed in frustration. The trees were growing densely around the mouth of the pond. This way all the trees would have to be cut down to be able to do it. I went out and started the 4-stroke engine, then took the machete to clear the trees, working hard for half a day to finish. The water in the pond was also dry. I glanced down at the pond and oh my, there was no fish to be seen and the fish bones were all over the pond. I was wondering what the hell happened to the fish when Mr. Ba Bin also came back. His mouth was open like me. He hurriedly came to me. "What happened to my fish, Quach? You ask me. Who do I ask? I also want to know. Is it because you behave in such a way that people hate you, and then come here and poison your fish pond? No way. I live a gentle life and never hurt anyone. Besides, The last few nights I slept behind my house. I heard the fish eating my nails all night long. Even if they were poisoned, today the fish just bloated up. Why did they just fall apart and leave their bones? How strange. Okay, I don't care. Are you going to clean the pond now? If not, pay me so I can go home. Snail, why not you? He turned away angrily. I had to continue working. I started rolling up my pants and wading into the pond. The mud was so deep that it reached my waist. The stench rushed up to my nose and almost made me vomit. Probably the smell of dead fish. I held the bucket and tried to scoop the mud up to the shore regularly. The sun was setting. I tried to scoop a few more buckets to finish the job. When I raised my hand to push the bucket down, I heard a loud pop. I stopped and put my hand deep into the stinking mud, groping around, and do you guys know what I pulled up? It was a human arm bone. At that moment I was so scared that I fell backwards. My face was bloodless. A long time later, I regained my composure and was about to shout to tell Bob in. But then I paused for a few seconds and looked at the arm. It seemed like there was something on that bony arm. I mustered up all my courage and lifted the bone with my trembling hand, then slowly wiped off the mud on it. It turned out to be a beautiful gold bracelet. It turned out to be a woman. Why did she die down here? Telling this, I felt so ashamed. Mr. Quach was silent, poured another glass of wine and gave it to me. He bowed his head and said in a low voice, instead of reporting to the police so that they could find out the truth, I was greedy and took the bracelet and pushed my other arm back to the bottom. I pretended that nothing happened, went upstairs to get the money and left. I hurried home to show it to men and planned to sell it to put it back in the dilapidated room of the couple. But his wife said, "Honey, is that immoral? I heard from the elders that if you take things from the dead, they will follow you home." I just sadly said to men, "Don't think too much. My room is already very dilapidated. The rainy season is coming soon, and my son is almost at school age. How can we manage without money? But, no, it's okay. I'll take it to the district market to sell. You stay home and look after the kids." Wait a minute. Why don't we just keep it for now and sell it when it's really necessary? I thought for a moment and then said, "Okay, just follow me." So my wife and I took it into the inner room and put it away, while I was busy with my daily work. Until that night, the weather seemed indescribably hot. I came home from work after a tiring day. The stubborn guy was already fast asleep. My wife was busy in the kitchen preparing dinner. I put the hoe on the shelf and went to the kitchen to hug my wife from behind, intending to be a little spoiled. But as soon as I touched her, I felt the cold air rush straight into me and a very strange stench wafted up. I quickly let her go. "You have a fever? Why are you so cold?" Men turned back and smiled at his son. "I'm fine." "Oh. Let me see, is it beautiful?" Having said that, Men raised his hand and shook the bracelet on his hand. The child exclaimed in panic, "Why are you wearing it? It's okay. I'll just try it on for a while and then take it off and put it away." The child scolded, "Put it away from me right now. If someone sees it, it will be annoying." "Okay, put it away." The wife picked it up and put it away, then went straight to the bedroom without paying any attention to the child. The child finished eating and went to sleep too. Midnight. I woke up to pee, lit the lantern in the room, opened my eyes and groped my way out in front of the house, looking for a corner of a coconut tree to relieve my mind. Everything around was dim, blending in with the sound of the wind in the quiet night, making the coconut leaves rustle against each other and then pass through my pants, making me shiver. Suddenly I heard the sound of water splashing behind the house. It seemed to be my house's water floor. Strangely, could it be my wife taking a bath? But it was past midnight. What kind of bath would she be taking? So I quickly ran into the house. lit the chimney lamp and groped my way out behind the house. The yellow light slowly made everything clearer. When I got to the water floor, I breathed a sigh of relief. It was indeed men taking a bath. His smooth white back was turned towards me. I smiled and joked, Take a shower, because this afternoon I heard that stubborn guy's mother had a bad smell. Take a shower quickly and go inside or you'll get sick. After saying that, I turned back into the house and put the lamp on the kitchen shelf in the back of the house. I was about to go back to the clothes rack to get a towel from my wife when an arm wrapped around my waist from behind. I laughed and knew right away that it was a ghost. What, you know it's cold, right? Men did not answer. I reached down to hold her hand and was startled to discover that my wife was wearing that bracelet again. I was about to turn back to scold her, but when I looked up at the wall of my house under the chimney light, my shadow was reflected on the wall of leaves. But the scary thing here was that the shadow of my wife holding the child from the side was nowhere to be seen on the wall. My legs began to go weak and tremble, so who was holding me in the end? That rotten smell started to return. I used all my strength to pull that arm away and turned back to look. When I saw the truth, I fell to the ground and crawled like a child. Before my eyes was a person in men's form with half of his face crushed and his lower jaw almost falling off, hanging limply from his face, covered in blood and a few maggots wriggling on that pile of rotting flesh. It smiled slightly. Its lifeless eyes stared at me and slowly approached. The rustling sound of the wind outside grew stronger. Then, poof, the smoky lamp went out, leaving a thick blackness that made it hard to breathe. Then, poof, the lamp burned again, but at this time its disgusting face was pressed against mine. It laughed loudly in the night. I screamed in panic and ran towards the room. Just as I reached the door of the room, men's shadows suddenly appeared from inside, making me fall flat on my back again, my face pale. My wife was holding the torch in her hand, rubbing her eyes, and then asked in panic, "What's wrong with you? You're yelling so loudly in the middle of the night. Be careful not to startle the baby." The child slowly stood up shyly. "Is that really you?" "What did I say? Me?" I trembled and raised my hand to touch men's chin. It was really men. At this time I mumbled, interrupting Mr. Quach. Could it be that the negative energy borrowed the soul? "This is really dangerous." Uncle Tu patted my shoulder and asked, "What's wrong, How?" "Oh, it's nothing, Mr. Quach. Please continue." Mr. Quach continued. He quickly grabbed his wife's hand and dragged her straight into the room, slamming the door shut. After panting for a while, he asked his wife, "Where's the bracelet?" "Where's the bracelet? It's in the closet. I told you to put it away." "Give it to me. I have to run to the district market to sell it right away." "Sell it right away, fast. Am I crazy? Who will open the door for me at this late hour?" What really happened? I did not answer, trying to calm myself down. "I'll sell it tomorrow morning." "Can't keep it." "Can I tell you what's wrong?" "It's okay. Go to bed with your baby." "Then you should go to bed early. You have to go to work tomorrow." After saying that, men went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I lit a cigarette and sat at the head of the bed, my eyes always looking at my wife, occasionally looking at the wardrobe where that evil thing was kept, until the rooster crowed. Men was startled to see that I was getting ready to change clothes. "Where are we going?" "Go to the district market." "What about the job of hoeing the fields for Mrs. High?" "If I accept the job and don't do it, she will come to my house and scold me." At that moment I stopped to think. My wife continued, "Well then, let's do it in the morning and then tell her to come back at noon." "It's not too late to go." "Okay, then I'll be back at noon." "At home, you absolutely cannot take that thing out, understand?" "I know. You go to work." I carried my hoe to the field, but my heart was filled with fear, and what I feared happened. That morning, his wife and children were at home, digging leaves in the front yard, while Siuli was playing inside. Suddenly he ran out and said to Men, "Mom, I have a friend to play with." Wife and children seemed confused. The house was located in the middle of the field. Where would there be children to play with it? "Who are you playing with?" "That ant in my house." Having said that, the old man pointed inside the house. His wife and children strained their eyes to look but saw no one. "There is no one in the house." "Yes, Mom. She is standing at the door laughing." Wife and children began to feel confused. "Okay, you can play in the yard. Don't go inside. Wait for your dad to come home." Siuli walked alone to the small fish net drying in the yard and sat there playing. Men felt somewhat reassured, so he continued working. After a while, his wife and children did not hear Siuli's voice anymore and were worried, so they turned to look for him. They saw Siuli kneeling with his head in the mouth of the net and his body swinging back and forth. Men shouted, "Lee, you're so stupid. Come here right now." The stubborn guy did not answer. His wife and children got angry and walked over with a whip, intending to hit him a few times. But as soon as they opened their mouths to whip him, the stubborn guy fell to the ground. His eyes were bloodshot, his tongue was sticking out, his body was pale white. The wife and children were so weak that they sat down on the ground, hugging the stubborn guy and screaming for help, crying until they were out of breath and choking. But the stubborn guy still lay there, not breathing anymore. Speaking of this, Mr. Quach choked up and burst into tears. Both Uncle Tu and I felt sorry for him because of his misfortune. He wiped away his tears and continued. Just then, I came home and saw men hugging the little boy and crying miserably. I knew something was wrong, so I threw down the hoe and rushed to my wife. "What's wrong with you, Siuli?" Men cried louder and said in a choked voice, "The child is dead. Why die? Why die?" My wife shook her head and continued to cry. I also cried. I hugged the stubborn body and felt like my heart was on fire. I looked up at his neck and saw a red mark with a very familiar pattern. I suddenly remembered that it was similar to the pattern on that bracelet. At that moment I was furious. My eyes bulged and I shouted loudly, "Is that you?" I jumped up and ran quickly into the house, grabbed the hammer and went into the room. Took out the evil thing in the wardrobe and threw it on the ground, then swung the hammer like crazy at it. The bracelet sank deep into the ground with hammer marks all over it. I gritted my teeth and shouted, "You killed my son. Are you happy now?" I bent down to dig up that ghostly ring, intending to give it a few more hammer blows. But strangely, the ring was not chipped at all, not even a small scratch. I shouted again, "I'm not afraid of you." I suddenly ran to the riverbank, swung my arms and threw him into the rushing water, then returned to my wife and children. That day I held a funeral for that stubborn guy. Because my family was poor, I only made him a small coffin and buried him behind the house. My wife cried and struggled for several days. From then on, she became sometimes crazy, sometimes sober. When she was in a daze, she would talk to herself and sit there laughing foolishly. Every night, I had nightmares. Sometimes I saw a female ghost chaining a child's neck. Sometimes I heard a whisper in my ear, "You brought this on yourself," and a loud laughter echoed. For a whole month, I couldn't sleep well. One morning, he came over to my house and invited me to go to work together. I lazily put on my shirt. He took a sip of tea and clicked his tongue and said, "Have you heard the news, Quach?" "What news?" "Babin's wife had a miscarriage." "Huh?" I looked up at him in surprise. "Why did you miscarry?" "I heard from the villagers that his second wife was scared of ghosts. They said that in the middle of the night, she went to the toilet behind the house and saw a white shadow crawling up from the pond. She was so scared that she fell and had a miscarriage." What happened next? Calm down and let me tell you. Mr. Babin asked someone to find a shaman or something to catch ghosts. I heard that a high-level shaman is coming today. Hearing this, I immediately had an idea. I quickly urged Mr. Hien to go to work first. I immediately ran to Mr. Ba Bin's house. When I got there, my shirt was soaked with sweat. I gasped for a while and then went into his house. As soon as I entered the gate, I saw an old man about 70 years old, leisurely sitting and drinking tea in the yard. I slowly approached him, and before I could ask anything, he said, "Gray forehead, negative senses. Must be encountering something that shouldn't be happening, right?" "Yes, that's right. I came here because I hope you can help me." The old man took another sip of tea, thinking for a while. Then Ba Bin walked out of the house into the yard. He looked respectful. "Sir, everything is ready." Having said that, he turned to look at his son, Quach. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, the old man stood up and went into the house. A moment later, he came out with a sharp hammer in his hand. Still not saying anything, he walked towards the huge tree growing right in front of Mr. Ba Bin's house. He swung his arm and firmly chopped at the tree. A moment later, the tree was cut down, leaving both me and Mr. Bin in shock. He walked towards the table where he had just poured a cup of tea and leisurely lit a cigarette. Mr. Ba Bin spoke in confusion. "Teacher, why did you cut down my tree?" "This is the tree my father planted when he was alive." The old man calmly took a puff of his cigarette and replied, "Do you know that your house is in a bad position in all 4 directions according to feng shui? There are still many issues that I will explain slowly so you can understand. May I ask if your father built this house himself or did he have someone else help him build it?" Mr. Ba Bin stammered, "Yes, thanks to the feng shui master. I don't know if your family has any grudges with that feng shui master, but everything built here is disadvantageous to the homeowner, at least causing disaster and illness, at worst causing death to future generations. The house here has violated the 5 feng shui killings: physical killing, light killing, air killing, sound killing, and wind killing. Physical killing is the tangible killing energy of visible objects. I will show you 2 things first. Do you know why I cut down the tree?" "No, sir. Because there is a big tree in front of your main door, called Men Cow Thursday Nuoi, which violates the taboo of feng shui and can easily make the homeowner sick. So I had to cut down the tree. Secondly, there is also a big road leading straight into the main door, which is the dike road in front of your house. People call it Lo Sung. The bigger the road, the higher the evil spirit. This position is also very dangerous. Now look, your land is covered with tall trees that block all the light, causing the yang energy to decrease and the yin energy to increase. Not yet, please come into the house with me." Having said that, the old man and Ba Bin quickly walked into the house, and the child followed behind. Entering the house, he pointed to the front door, then turned around and pointed to the back door. "Look, your house's main door is facing the back door. The luck has just entered and has not yet gathered. This is called piercing the road to kill. Now look up at the ceiling. The main beam of the house is piercing straight into the middle of the main door without a single deviation. This is called piercing the heart to kill. Do you often have insomnia and are always mentally restless?" Ba Bin nodded repeatedly. "It's not over yet. Can I go into your room and take a look?" "Yes, please." "Go ahead." He leisurely walked back into the room, then went to the window right at the head of Ba Bin and his wife's bed, looked out the side of the house for a while, then turned back and said, "Can you tell me whose grave is that out there?" "Yes, it's my father's grave." "So what year was he born?" 1910. "What about you?" "Yes, 1940. The old man muttered to himself and sighed. "To tell you the truth, it's a miracle that you've kept your life until now." Ba Bin panicked. "Teacher, what do you mean by that?" did the feng shui master also advise you that when your father died, he should build a horizontal grave with his feet facing the house? Yes, that's right, teacher. He said that if we do that, our descendants will enjoy the blessings of their ancestors. The old man shook his head in disappointment. His father's grave faces northeast and his feet face southwest, right at the head of his bed. His father was born in the year of the dog, with the metal element falling into the Qian palace. His father was born in the year of the dragon, with the fire element falling into the Lai palace. Qian Duong Kim met the fire palace and the year star was Nga Kui, that is, the star Lim Tin shining on the head of his bed. Disaster would definitely fall on his eldest son. He was truly very vicious. After hearing that, Ba Bin's face changed color significantly. Cold sweat poured down his forehead. He started to cry and begged the old man for help. Teacher, is there any way to save me? I don't want to die yet. I haven't finished talking yet, so don't cry yet. There's something even more terrifying. Get up and follow me to the back of the fish pond. So everyone went to the fish pond behind Ba Bin's house. Only then did the old man pay attention to me. He turned to look at me and said, "Hey man, take a shovel and go to the four corners of the pond, measure down 3 hand spans from the mouth of the pond, then dig in and get those things for me." Hearing that, the child turned pale and stammered, "What do you want?" "Stop talking nonsense. Dig up whatever you find and bring it up for me."